This morning I'm beginning a two-part series of messages that we're calling Go. And it's based on the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where Jesus says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." And so I thought we'd just economize and just say, go. It's not watch. It's not let others go. He's saying to every one of us here to go and make disciples. And he's saying that to us as a church as well. And so in this season of change here at Mount of Olives, I thought I would speak into some issues that I think are important for the years to come. And so I want to talk about Jesus' mandate on his church to go and make disciples. And I want to talk about a couple of principles today. And the first one is simply that the church must always be relevant to the culture. The church must always be relevant to the culture. That's so very important because most churches aren't. If you go around and look at churches across the country, especially Lutheran churches, you'll find that they're irrelevant to the culture. That when people come, especially people that are unchurched, that never regularly go to church, quite often they don't know what's going on. We have rituals and liturgies and traditions that people don't understand. And we have names for things that no one comprehends. You know, we talk about, the entrance to the church is called the narthex. And we don't say that here very often. I had one woman say, the north exit. No, it's not the north exit. That's west, by the way. But we use all this language, justification, sanctification, and we rarely explain it. And so when unchurched people come, it's confusing. They don't understand it. We're standing, we're sitting in more liturgical services. We're doing all kinds of complicated stuff, and people don't understand. And then there's language we don't get. And they leave feeling ignorant. And nobody ever comes back to a place where they feel ignorant, do they? The saddest part of all that, though, is that most people in most churches don't care. They don't even think about those who are unchurched. They don't even think about what their experience is like here on a Sunday morning or any church. And they don't care. Because what they'll say is, they'll only focus on what they want. They'll only focus on what they believe is important, what would meet their needs. It doesn't even occur to them to think about Jesus saying, go and make disciples of all nations, and therefore we need to think about where people are coming from and where they're at in their life so we can speak into that in a powerful way and use tools that speak into that as well. And so it's very sad that most people don't recognize it or don't even really care or think it's important because all we ever think about is what I want. And what we've done in that is we've become customers of the Christian faith, not disciples of the Christian faith. What do we do as customers? We say things like, I'm not going to Ralph's anymore. I don't like their produce section. I'm going to Albertsons now. Isn't that what we do? And we do that in church. But I'll bet the Apostle Paul, in fact, I know the Apostle Paul, never said, I really don't like all this flogging I have to go through, and I don't like being shipwrecked, and I don't like being in prison. I don't like being ridiculed. I don't like being run out of town. But you don't find any complaining. Why? Because he knew what it meant to be a disciple. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And so what this means, to move from customer to disciple, is to die to self, And I know, it exists here too, because I see these communication cards that come in, and I don't like this, and I don't like that, and why don't you do this? What is that? That's customer talk, not discipleship talk. Think about it for a moment. Think about a sports team. High school, college, professional. Take a football team. Here's what you won't hear in the huddle. You won't hear in the huddle one of the players saying, hey, quarterback, you're calling this play a little too fast, and you're making us run a little too far, and I had to really run out there to get that last ball, and you're making it harder on us. It's really not, I'm not very comfortable here today. Or, Every time you throw that Hail Mary pass, the crowd just goes crazy. Why don't you do that every time we get the ball? Never mind that it's the first quarter and we're down 28-0. Never mind. The crowd loves it and will be popular. You don't hear that. You don't hear that. What you hear instead is plays that work, a change of play because that one isn't working, because it's not about what I want, it's about the mission. And if it's not working, they reinvent it and change it so it will. The church has got to do the same thing and stop being customers and start being disciples. Forgetting what I want, what will work? That's the real question. What will work effectively to reach people who are far from God? Because you see, when you think about it, they don't have a very good opinion of us, many people that don't go to church, for a variety of reasons. And so we have to be even more sensitive to be able to reach them. Many years ago, I attended a conference over here at the Crystal Cathedral with Dr. Schuler. It was a couple hundred pastors. And he asked us a question I'll never forget. He asked us this question: who are you trying to impress? And then he went on. He said, maybe you're trying to impress that former professor you had in seminary. Maybe you're thinking in the back of your mind, I wonder what Dr. Jensen would think of my theology this morning. Or I wonder what Dr. Lathrop would think of our worship experience today. Those are a couple of my professors. And is that in the back of your mind? He asked us. Or maybe you're thinking about, I want to impress the choir. I want to impress the board. I want to impress the elite members of the congregation or a certain group in the congregation. He says, but here's who you really ought to be trying to impress. The people you should try to impress are the people that aren't there. The people who never come. That's who you should be trying to impress. But here's what happens in the average church around the country. You'll have a young family, for example. Let's take our area, for example. Young family, he's very successful in the corporate world. They live in Koto. She's a stay-at-home mom. He has a beautiful car. He lives in a beautiful home and drives to an office in Newport Beach. It's a beautiful place. And he doesn't believe the church has anything for him. He thinks the church, all they want is your money, and they're boring. And all the church is good for is for old ladies and children. But then there's that Sunday when the next door neighbor's baby's being baptized and they got to go. And so he goes to church, at that church, and he walks in the door, and the minute he gets in there, he's been looking around, he sees the weeds growing, he sees the paint peeling, he sees the green carpet from the 1970s that's worn out. He says, see, they don't believe it either because they don't even take care of this place. And then the service starts, and he's right. It's boring. And it doesn't say anything and speak anything into his life. And so he walks out the door saying, you see, they've got nothing for me. When Jesus says go and make disciples, to a congregation, one of the things it means is to be relevant to the culture so we can reach the culture. Jesus did this. I invite you to turn with me. Well, let me back up. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I wanted to mention missionaries. This is exactly what missionaries do. Missionaries think about what is the culture? How do I reach the culture with their cultural tools? A missionary doesn't say, you know what, I'm going to impose my American culture on these people. No. A good missionary says, I want to learn their language. I want to learn their customs. I want to learn their practices. So that when I go into that mission field in that country, I'm going to be able to effectively speak into their lives using their cultural tools. When I was in Norway several years ago, my wife was born there, so we've gone several times, and we were traveling all over the country. Her father took us all over, and we were in Trondheim and Bergen, our favorite city, and so we ended up we were in a little church, a small church that was the oldest church in Norway, 1,000 years old. And we're being given a tour, and as we're walking around, I noticed in the ceiling, there's these symbols all around at the top of the ceiling. And some of them I recognized, crosses, a baptism symbol, the Trinity, but then there were symbols I didn't understand. So I said to the guide, what are those symbols that I don't understand? She said, oh, those are pagan symbols. I said, pagan symbols in a Christian church? Why in the world would you have pagan symbols in a Christian church? She said, well, you got to realize 1,000 years ago, paganism was the major religion in Norway. It wasn't Christianity. And so as Christianity was coming into our nation and people were coming to faith in Jesus, we needed to use tools that would help them feel comfortable coming into our places of worship and knowing that they're welcomed here and wanted here. And so we did things to help identify with their cultural experience. That's what missionaries do. And we, dear friends, are the mission field right here. You and I are meant to be missionaries right here in this place. Because if we don't, churches that fail to do this, we have a name for them. They're called dying churches. They're called dying churches. Some of you don't believe this church could ever die. I believe many here in this congregation take the health of this church for granted. If you come from a non-Protestant background, you've been in churches that probably are so strong, and because of some of their foundations, people are there no matter what. But in Protestant churches, it's not like that. And if you're not doing things in the right way, people walk out the door and they never come back again. If we're not relevant to the culture, people don't keep coming. It's as simple as that. And churches can die. So that's one of the reasons why we need to be relevant to the culture. I want to show you a passage in Matthew's Gospel in the 4th chapter, verses 18 to 20. And as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Look at the brilliance of Jesus. He sees two fishermen, professional fishermen, and what does he talk to them about? Fishing. How does he give them a higher calling for their life? He speaks in their language, in a way they'll comprehend. He says, I want to make you fishers of people. Brilliant. Brilliant. The Apostle Paul does the same thing. In Acts chapter 17, I invite you to turn there. In Acts chapter 17, we hear how the Apostle Paul was in Athens, Greece. And he's going around the city and he notices these statues to various gods. And finally, they're a pagan nation as well, and he comes across the statue to an unknown god. Why would they have a statue to an unknown god? Well, because they figured out that they thought they had named all the gods they worship, but just in case they missed one, they had a statue to the unknown god, see, covering all their bets. And so the Apostle Paul now is at Mars Hill, which is next to the Parthenon on the Acropolis. A group of us were there a year ago in May, and I spoke actually in this very spot. This was a debating area called Mars Hill. And in Acts 17, here's what Paul says about the unknown God statue, verses 22 and 23. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with an inscription to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." What did he do? He said, I see this unknown God here. Let me tell you who it is. It's Jesus. And he goes on to share the gospel with them. He takes their cultural experience and speaks into it with the gospel message. In 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul goes into more depth about this and explains what he's doing in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 22 to 23. In fact, actually, starting at verse 15, he goes into a lot of depth on this point, but I want to pick it up as summary here in verses 22 and 23. He says, "To the weak I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that I may share in its blessing. To the weak I become weak. I become all things to all people, so I could reach just a few. That's what we should be doing. That's what we should be doing. Are we culturally relevant today? That means a church needs to be reinventing itself all the time to be culturally relevant. You see, the content of what we preach never ever changes, but the package of the delivery must change all the time to be relevant. I want to teach one more principle today, and it's the concept of the 50-year life cycle of a church. Many years ago, Dr. Gary McIntosh was here, and he spoke about this concept. I wished I had learned this concept when I first was a pastor. Had I known this when I was ordained, my first two churches probably today would be different places. But I share it with you today because this congregation must always understand this concept so that this church is here for the decades to come. So let's start with the basic concept of the 50-year life cycle of a church. It looks like this. We're doing something brand new. Talk about reinventing ourselves. I got a pointer. Nope, wrong button. There. Hey, look at that. Wow, modern technology for a grandpa. Anyway, okay, so a church starts right in here, and if it's a successful church, it grows. All right? And it keeps growing and growing and growing, but then up in here, it starts to plateau. And then over here, after a while, it starts to decline, and then it dies. That's what happens in most churches. And what's missing is that if at around here they were to have a new vision, they could start a whole new 20-year cycle, a whole new 50-year cycle. And so that every 20 to 30 years, there needs to be a new cycle. That's what I didn't know. Because if there is, you can avoid this one, and you can have a new one, and then a new one, and then a new one. I want to show you an example of two churches. The first church is Bethel Lutheran Church in Encino. I'm going to get emotional about this because it was my home church, okay? My home church. I grew up in this church. I went to elementary school in this church. It started in 1951 with Pastor Shank. And they built a school, and they built a school and they built a worship center. You may have driven past this church many times on the Ventura Freeway. Came in later, right on the Ventura Freeway in Encino, between the White Oak and Balboa exits. A big girder structure steeple with holes in the cross. That came later. But right here, a small little building and a school, and I went to that school. And then several years later, in the 60s, Pastor Shank moved on, and Pastor Philip Natwick, a very vision-oriented and very outgoing pastor, came, and they built another worship center, the one that I just referred to, and church offices as well. And they put in a preschool at that time. And then fast forward to the 1970s, Pastor Robert Black is the pastor, and they have an orchestra, they have a theater department. The Life Assurance Company is developed. I helped create that. It was a group of 65 high school and young people that sang contemporary Christian musicals, and we toured all over the western United States. It lasted for 30 years. What I'm trying to point out to you is this church was very entrepreneurial, especially in this season. Brian Sullivan, the opera singer, was a member, and he would sing quite often. The author, John Ball, who wrote In the Heat of the Night, was a member there. A lot was going on. In fact, John Ball took Pastor Blacka and Gloria Blacka to Tibet with him on vacation one year. And there Pastor Blacka met the Dalai Lama. And he invited the Dalai Lama to come and speak at our congregation at Bethel Lutheran Church in Encino the next time he was in the United States. And he accepted. And he came, and he did. And by now I was a pastor, and so I robed up with all the other pastors. 40 of us marched in. The congregation, the place was packed. Secret Service were on the roof with sharpshooters. It was a day, boy, I'll tell you. But it said a lot about the entrepreneurial spirit, the vision casting, the creativity that was going on. It was a dynamic, exciting place to be. I learned so much from the parents of my friends. They were all creative people. One was a radio disc jockey. On and on it went. And it just shaped me in so many ways. But then Pastor Blackham, many years later, got sick, and the church began to decline. And it went from about 300 a Sunday to 100 a Sunday. And then I was asked to come and serve in 1984 as senior pastor in my home congregation. What an honor. And I was there 8.5 years. And during that time, we reinvigorated the life assurance company, and we got the church growing again, and we grew it back to 250 a Sunday. But I didn't know about the 50-year life cycle, because at that point I would have started a new cycle. I would have started something new. But I didn't know. And so the church, I moved on in 1993. I went to this church called Mount of Olives Lutheran Church in Mission Viejo to be the senior pastor. And but then the church, in the years later, they brought in a pastor who wanted more ritual, wanted to be more and more exclusive to the culture, and the church started to decline to where now they were under 100 a Sunday at 75 a Sunday. He moves on, and Pastor Comer comes in. I helped get Pastor Comer. He grows it back to about 120 a Sunday, and then he's there for many years, and he moves on. And the new pastor brings in more of a social justice emphasis, many more liberal theologies, totally irrelevant to what people's lives are about, and the church begins to decline. They sell the elementary school, or they close it in the year 2000, and then the property is sold in 2018. And the buildings are knocked down. 35 people today meet in a Presbyterian church on Sunday nights. That's it. All because they never reinvented themselves in here. Take Mount of Olives now. Church started in 1967. Pastor Lang, land donated by the Mission Viejo Company. Worship center is built, the one next to us. Preschool is built. And then in 1973, Dr. Pedersen comes. He's here for 17 years. A new worship center, you're in it. The original sanctuary is now a multi-purpose room. And now in the 1980s, the choir's growing, student ministries are growing. And then in 1987, they build the new Creation Center. Sanctuary, the old sanctuary is used for church offices, choir room, and youth room. And then Dr. Pedersen retires. He moves on, and they bring in this guy from Encino, Stewart, 1993. And I start a lot of new things. And without even knowing it, I'm breaking the cycle right here. I learned that about a little later after I get here from Dr. McIntosh. But we start drive-through nativity. We start Weekend in the Word. We widen this building, add 30% more seating. We put in screens. We bring in rock and roll bands to praise worship. I'm told I'm a heretic and I'm not a Lutheran anymore. But the church grows from 400 a Sunday to over 600 a Sunday. And then, of course, COVID hits. But we saw growth. And then in 2015, I've been here 33 years. So after 20 years, we start a new life cycle, because now I know we got to do it. We start a new life cycle, and we build the Kid City building, $5.5 million building. It's a kid magnet. It looks like Toontown on the inside. Wacky World is the company that did the interior to give us the next 20-year cycle. But guess what? That was built in 2015, and it's 2026. It won't be long, and a new 20-year vision must take place. And unless we know that and are strategic in doing this, Mount of Olives runs the risk of someday not existing, like Bethel Lutheran Church. I don't want that. I've given my life to this and to this place. I don't want that. We've got to do this better. We can't do it like we've always done it. We can't be thinking about what you want, I want. It's not about me, it's not about you. It's about what Jesus wants for his church. And so that means we need to be sober and adults and mature and stop our causes and say, I want what Christ wants for his church. And what does he want? He wants us to go. He wants us to go as a church, to go and make disciples and to be intentional in doing so. Pray with me this morning. Lord, help us to capture this vision that you've laid out for your church. Help us, Lord, to understand it and then implement it. Help us to die to self and be disciples to carry it out. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.